Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Passport to Wealth, the podcast that takes you on a journey through navigating your finances as a U.S. expat. I'm your host, Arielle Tucker, a certified financial planner and enrolled agent focusing on cross-border planning for U.S. expats. And I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Savannah Chafin, a CFP candidate, enrolled agent, and self-declared expat tax nerd, here to guide you through the maze of life and finances across borders and share the inspiring stories of fellow U.S. expats who have navigated the process.
Good morning, Arielle.
Good morning, Savannah.
And welcome back, everyone, to Passport to Wealth. Today, we're doing the next episode in the Escaping the U.S. series. So in the last episode in this series, we tackled the challenge of moving your belongings abroad. So today, we're diving into one of the biggest hurdles for expats, and that is finding housing. So whether you're moving abroad for a short stint or planning to settle down, finding the right home abroad is a really key part of making that move feel real.
Yes. Finding housing can be like really exciting. I don't know. I go back and think about House Hunters, like the international version. Did you ever watch that? I think it was
No.
on TLC. Oh, it's great. Like they would basically follow around a couple and they would look at 3 different properties in different international cities. And you kind of got a sense of like, wow, what would these places actually look like to live in? Throughout Italy or France or Germany. And it was a really cool show. I think maybe they still make it. And I know for sure they're on YouTube. I think also today we're going to share a bit of our own personal experiences of finding housing, especially when we're thinking about moving to large cities, throughout globally, there is a bit of a housing shortage right now. So it could be really tricky and can feel a little overwhelming as you try to find something in a different country, in a different location. Maybe you've never even been there.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll start off with, finding your landing pad. So, you are maybe as a first step, I always recommend that, clients look for temporary housing. You've landed, you're planning an international move. Oftentimes, if you're planning for a longer international move, you're going to have a shipment, like a container shipment. That can take anywhere between like 6 to 12 weeks. And during COVID, time was actually even longer to have your belongings shipped. And so obviously you're going to leave the US on day 1. And basically by the next day, you're going to be in your new country. So I think it's really important as a first step to have temporary housing. Sometimes that could be like a hotel, an Airbnb. And then there's a lot of like local providers that offer like temporary furnished apartments.
Yeah. And I think one important point here as well is to be a little cautious when you're choosing temporary housing. We were talking a little bit about this before we hit record, but my first temporary place in Vienna, I stayed in an Airbnb and I have a dog and they had fleas, which they gave to Shada, which was not really a fun experience. So just be a little cautious and be flexible when it comes to that. If you find a temporary housing place and it doesn't seem to be the best situation, you can always move into a new location. That's possible for you.
That's a great point. And, just thinking about our own experience that I shared a little bit when we first moved to Berlin. I mean, we worked with an international relocation person. Like we found a place and we used a service called Wonderflat. So it was a furnished apartment. And we basically just showed up from our flight, with 4 suitcases and our cat. And the place was trashed. Like, I kid you not, like the beds were unmade, the bed was broken. There was like dishes and food in the refrigerator. I mean, it was so gross. And looking, but at that time, like we didn't know what to do and we couldn't get a hold of the owners. And looking back, I wish we had just been like, no, we refuse to stay here. And we would have just gone to a hotel and found something different. But we were all jet lagged. I wasn't thinking correctly. And I was like, I don't know. We just accepted it. And then they brought in a cleaner like the following week and had it like deep cleaned. But, it turns out like the owners had let their friends stay there for a portion of our rental. So like they only allowed the rental to start the first of the month, but we weren't actually moving to Berlin, I think, until like, I don't know, the 16th of the month. So we had paid for basically 2 weeks that they knew we would not be using the flat. They let their friends stay there. they had assumed that the cleaner would come in and clean up after this person, that somehow that never happened. And we were like literally just like left with like a trash department. It was so upsetting. And when you're like, especially when you're with kids and you're settling in, I mean, I was trying, trying to work at a new job and figure out this new city. It was really like overwhelming. And going back, if you walk into a situation like that, I highly recommend just like not accepting it and letting everyone know you refuse to accept it, because when we ended up leaving, like we ended up getting charged for all this stuff. It was a really horrible leaving process. We really got scammed. Another thing is just scams, right? Like if you are in really hot housing markets and you're looking online, there are a couple things to look out for. So if the person is like, oh, I'm out of the country and you can have my place, and it seems really cheap, or even like just a little cheaper than like market rates, that's like a red flag. If you're not ever going to be able to meet this person, if no one can show you the apartment, I think also this goes to, we had a relocation consultant. So we had someone on the ground who is like kind of able to tell us like what are the good neighborhoods, and if they needed to, we could have had them, I think we did actually have them look at some of the apartments directly to make sure that they're actually real apartments and it's not just a scam. I mean, I don't know if you've heard of people getting scammed that way as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also really important which platform you use to find the place, because if you use a service like Airbnb, which offers refunds if it's a scam or something like that, or they like vet also the different apartments. So I think using a reputable service like that is better than finding probably a place on like Craigslist. So again, just paying attention where you're finding housing is also really important.
Yeah, that's a really great point.
And then kind of a caveat into why we're saying temporary housing, and that is because it's a great shift into finding a permanent housing. So I have found every time I've traveled to a new place or moved to a new country, it's almost impossible to find housing unless you have feet on the ground. So yeah, so once you land, you start searching for something new, and there's so many options to explore. You can use Facebook groups, like expat Facebook groups is a really good source of truth for finding housing, as well as online platforms. If you're in Germany, for example, Immowelt is a really good option, which to help you kind of navigate the German market. But yeah, depending on which country you're living in, there's a lot of different kind of online options that you can explore.
Yeah, and I think what you like when I love the Facebook groups for creating community, for finding apartments. I mean, especially in those hot housing markets, oftentimes people will just like go to the expat group, be like, hey, we're moving out of our apartment before we publish it publicly. Would anyone be interested in? And sometimes that becomes like a great way to actually find an apartment. But again, you want to do your homework, you want to do your due diligence here and make sure you're not being scammed, because there are scams everywhere. In Switzerland, we use, Flat Fox, HomeGate, Immo Scout. Some of these are also just like available across Europe more generally. They'll have their each like European site. I think also for us, temporary housing was always a great one because we were waiting for a shipment. And two, you really can get the lay of the land of the city. Like where do you feel at home? And so if you have a bit of luxury to be able to kind of choose which area you want to be in, you can really do your homework and walk the neighborhoods, eat at the restaurants, go and play at the parks before you pick your final destination or final like kind of specific area or neighborhood you want to be in.
Yeah. So once you start kind of starting the process looking for housing, next is applying for housing and going to viewings. So whether you're in person or doing a virtual tour, there are a few things to keep in mind when you go to viewings. The first is be prepared to ask a lot of questions. Those can include what until utilities are included, how's the access to public transport, is it a furnished or unfurnished place? Do they allow pets? There's a lot of different questions you really need to take into consideration when you're going to viewings for apartments like this or
Yeah.
houses.
Yeah, and I mean a lot of this information is usually available on the listing, but but not always, and especially if you're coming from where you're really just used to the US system and you're coming into a new country. I mean it is a different process, right? And it is in a different language. I think one of the things that I think is, well, it's not so different from the US, but right, we have the like additional utilities. So generally every month you're paying into a portion for the utilities. And then like at the end of the year, they'll like settle it. So maybe you pay $250 or 250 euros or so per month for utilities. But the reality is you actually on average, spent 300 euros on utilities. You'll actually receive a bill in the beginning of the new year and you have to settle that. So that can be like a little bit different. I also think now, I don't know, this seems a little controversial, but I think I think you have to, as an expat and you're someone in the country, you really have to show who you are. So one of the things that our family has always done when applying for apartments or houses is we include a letter. Like it has a picture of our family and it tells who we are, why we're in the country, who we're employed by. And we just try to like add some additional context because otherwise there's just like you're kind of in a sea of applications. And I found that's always been really helpful in securing like really good housing.
Nice. I've never sent a picture or a letter, but I've also, yeah, been pretty successful along the way too. So I don't know. I guess it just comes with applying. I recently moved into this new place. And that's kind of what I did. I applied to around 100 different apartments and then kind of just see what lands. Of course, I didn't see all of those, right? It's applying, kind of asking up front if they'll accept your documents because not everyone will when you're an expat and stuff like that, especially depending on your employment situation. So yeah, that's the next point, which is the application process. So you've been to an apartment, you like it a lot. What is the next step? And that is the application process, which can vary a lot from country to country, but there are a few common themes kind of across the board. And that's that most landlords will ask for a proof of income or employment, and in many cases, a deposit. So that it can be a range of a few months up front. Really depends on the situation you're in.
Now, for us in Switzerland and in Germany, it was 3 months rent as our deposit. What is it in Vienna?
It kind of depends on the place. So at my current apartment, it was 2 months. And then if you have a dog, an additional 1 month, so 3 months deposit. Um, but I know as I was kind of going through the application process here, because I'm self-employed, a lot of the the companies didn't necessarily like that. So they said I could offer an increased deposit to kind of secure the place, which was interesting. Some of those were like between 6 and 15 months of a deposit up
Oh my
front,
gosh.
which was ridiculous.
And I just want to like talk a little bit about these rental deposit accounts because they work differently than in the US. And so when you actually go and have a rental deposit account, this is the correct thing, right? This is something to look for is it's actually a new account that you and your landlord are on that account. It is a joint account with this person. Side note, this does have to be reported on your FBAR. If there's any interest, it does have to be reported on your tax return. But this protects both of you, right? You can't just take the money out and they can't just take the money out. And if there are fees or charges at the end of the contract, they have to provide you with like an itemized list and you have to sign off on that before they can actually take the money out of the account. Right. So, and this is another point too. It's really great to have legal insurance when you are renting in a foreign country and you don't understand your rights. I've seen a lot of our friends and colleagues be taken advantage of in apartment situations. And so having legal insurance allows you, like, you get a new contract, you send that over and you have the lawyer review that contract. And when you're moving out, and I would say this is very important, when you're moving out, when they tell you what the fees are, then you also have the lawyer review this information because, there's certain items like if you've lived in a place for, I think 7 years and now they're saying, oh, we need all carpet. Well, that carpet has already been depreciated and they can't just like charge you now for new carpeting. So it's really important to understand what your rights are. And that can be really hard to navigate if you just don't even understand the system that you're in. The other thing that I want to point out is in both Germany and Switzerland, we were asked to show like a proof of like no debt. Um, so that might be something that you're asked for. We always had to show our visas as part of our application to show that we have like a legal right. And some visas it's easier to get an apartment than others. So if you're on like a very short-term contract, a lot of landlords, unless they're offering furnished short-term accommodation, they don't want to rent to you for a year or two. And again, like to your point about like, are you here as a self-employed person? Are you here as a student? Or are you fully employed local long-term contract?
Nice.
Okay. So now we're settling in. Yeah. So, I mean, I think this whole process of, first you move and then you're in temporary accommodations a lot of the time, and now we're finally settling in. I mean, I think the most important takeaway here is give yourself so much grace. I really feel like, I mean, our family's moved a lot, and I feel like it really takes like 1 to 2 years to feel like at home and like comfortable in your apartment or house.
Yeah, and in the new environment as well. Because unless you're very, very familiar with the city that you're moving to, you're not going to know the area you're living in really well. So it'll take some time to explore, find the places you like, find people that you like who make it feel like home. So yeah, giving it grace is a really good point there. But yeah, so I guess that's a wrap for today's episode. Finding housing abroad can feel like a big challenge, but with the right approach, it is totally doable. So remember to be patient, stay flexible, ask a lot of questions, and as Arielle said, give yourself some grace.
Yeah. Finding and settling into a permanent home is just a huge milestone in your expat journey. So thanks again for tuning into Passport Wealth. If you've got any tips or stories to share about house hunting abroad, we'd love to hear you. Until next time, and happy house hunting. Thank you for tuning in. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes packed with insights and stories to empower your global financial journey. This is Passport to Wealth, where your financial future knows no borders.
The information provided in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It should not be considered professional, financial, or tax advice.
We strongly recommend consulting with a qualified financial advisor, tax professional, or other appropriate expert before making any financial decisions or taking action based on the content discussed in this episode.
Your personal financial situation is unique, and a professional can provide tailored advice to meet your specific needs.